Yeah, Anfechtungen. Good. So that's what we call this little point of transfer or transitioning from despair to Christ. And I think it would be helpful for us at this stage to quickly look at the text of thesis 18, 19, and 20. We've already mentioned 18. Now it is certain that man must utterly despair of his own abilities before he is prepared to receive the grace of Christ. I think we understand that. We've gone through it now. As long as the illusion remains with you that you can lean on your own works, then a great disappointment is waiting to happen. But then thesis 19 and 20. Here we have now in thesis 19, the theology of glory summed up. That person does not deserve to be called a theologian who looks upon the invisible things of God as though they were clearly perceptible in those things which have actually happened. I want to ask you if you want to elaborate on this, but I just quickly want to throw in then the note of the historical context of this again. In the medieval system, very much so, in up until today, the Catholics have a very, I would be tempted to say, good relation between faith and reason. And in the medieval context, obviously, the philosophy, the moral philosophy also of Aristotle, had an immensely big role to play in Christian doctrine and in the doctrine of salvation. So, according to this, and Luther uses Romans 1 as a reference point here. I don't know. Do you have the quote perhaps offhand to refer to?
Not yet. I can get
Okay.
it quickly.
Right. Whilst you search for it, in the medieval period, the place of the theologian would be to somehow bring harmony between moral philosophy and revelation. So you have this elaborate system by means of virtues and vices, virtues which you should train yourself into become a good enough person, vices which you should keep away from far enough so that you do not become a condemnable person. And this process of, one could perhaps say, natural theology tries, by means of an elaborate system, a glorious system, you could even say, to give us a blueprint for becoming good enough for God. And I think here in thesis 19, Luther says that if that to you is the heart of theology, you do not deserve to be called a theologian. But perhaps over to you as to why is this the case? Why does Luther say this? Like, what's the basis for it?
Well, maybe let me just first read the quote quickly.
Yes.
I got it. For I am not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who has faith, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. And then verse 17, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed through faith, for faith, as it is written, the one who is righteous will live by faith.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the right one, right?
Yes. No, I think that definitely does cover it. If I'm not mistaken, would you read verse 20 as well? Sorry, I've just got the notes here.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, just by the way, the big turning point for Luther was, of course, that he interpreted the word righteousness differently here.
Mm-hmm.
That is the righteousness of God and not our righteousness.
I would love you to please expand upon that, because I think there's necessity to expand upon that.
Yeah, I've got it. Ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been seen and understood through the things God has made. So they are without excuse. No, I don't have the next part.
Yeah, but I think actually that's a good point. But they are without excuse who have not yet heard the gospel, who have not received God's law, because precisely this, as the ancient Greeks tried to advance it, that by means of natural reason, you can pursue virtue and become a good person. The Catholics try to hold on. Catholics of the Middle Ages, against whom Luther is protesting here, try to hold on to that and then bring it in some way, shape, or form into harmony with the gospel and say that Christ helps you just a little bit more to become a really good person. So you've got you've got the theological virtues, and then you also have I think they call them the classical virtues. And
Mm.
by means of growing in all of this virtue, you will become a good enough person. To which Luther says, "Na na 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 na." Because of
And
that,
maybe on this point,
yeah,
I can just say we can think today of how we often say, I want to be a better version of myself, or I feel like I'm the best me when I'm with a certain person. But it's kind of like this other thing or person is there to make you better and to make you reach that one ideal. And I think what Luther is trying to say here is as well is uh, uh, if your ideal is to be a morally good person through Christ, then yes, that's good. But I think there's something even greater there that Christ can give us, or that we have through Christ, which I think you can say.
Well, actually, I want to throw the ball right back at you because I might just drop the word, but then I'm going to say, please expand, because I think that the answer to that is yes, we do have something ultimately greater, and that is righteousness, the righteousness
Exactly.
of Christ. But there's
Yes.
quite a big difference between the righteousness of Christ and my own conceived ideas of righteousness. As you said, Luther's here
Yeah.
interpreting it as the righteousness of God, and yeah, not my imagined being good enough. If you'd
Yeah.
like to
Yeah.
expand.
So obviously, instead of a grand and big plan, or our motivational speakers and motivational messages and our philosophies and our scientific discoveries that maybe tell us, wow, this is the way to an unending life or an infinite life. In spite of that, I would say a theologian of the cross would nowadays say, well, even then, still Christ is the only way to eternal life and the only way we can be saved. And that is a gift of righteousness to us. That's how I understand it.
You use such excellent words because they allow us to flow so naturally through this. First, I want to stop at that word that you've just used now, grace, and I think this is also something. Well, obviously, one can
Yeah.
look at the word etymologically, just look at how it's constructed and where it comes from, and that gives you kind of a clue. But grace is from the Latin gratis, which means gift. And a gift is by definition not something that you can, earn or that you can by means of your troubles get. It is something freely given on the initiative of another. It's not something that you deserve. You deserve a salary. You deserve a loan. I don't know if that's the real English. But you do not deserve a
It's fine, yeah.
gift. A gift is freely given. And
Hmm.
as you've just mentioned, that when it comes to our salvation, that is a matter of grace. It is not a matter
Exactly.
of deserving. Yeah, because as we ended the last podcast, you deserve nothing but hell.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
if you think about it, mm, what we do when we think or say we can be better persons, and then show God how righteous we have become because of Him or something like that. If we think that is uh, that is the ultimate goal, then we're looking at this gift of God and saying, God,
no,
I don't
thank
really
you.
need this.
Hmm.
I can do it on my own.
And we're lying to ourselves. Partly, I think, through ignorance, and partly through willful ignorance. Because on the one hand, and we might be able to stop for a brief while on this point, but I think, we could expand on the topic of sin generally, though there is
Hmm.
a very accomplished theologian whom we both know. Who's actually brought
Yes.
out a 5-minute long video on the topic, which is excellent. Perhaps we can drop a link to it in the description. But the effects of sin, the effects of our own sins, I mean, much of it we can see, and the effects are devastating and reason enough for us to wish to stick our heads in the sand and just not look at it, or perhaps cease to have to deal with it, however that would look. But many of the effects of our sin, many of the effects of our not being in line with God's will, our inability to be in line with God's will, that has such a cumulative effect in the lives of others, which we are not even aware of. So if we don't take seriously the fact of our being in big trouble regarding our own goodness, then we're not honest. We're not honest with ourselves, and we're not honest to God, to use the English expression.
Exactly. And maybe on that point, you can read the next thesis while I plug in my laptop.
Okay, perfect. A great tag teaming here. Yes.